Hi everyone! We're so excited to do another edition of Catching Up with a Week.
Yay!
Yeah, very excited. It's been a
Week th-
really,
Week three, right?
it's
Today?
week
Okay.
three,
Yeah.
yeah, week three, and it's been really rewarding going through all your reading responses and
Mm-hmm.
looking at how deeply you're thinking about so many of the critical issues that we're talking about in this class.
Mm-hmm.
So Vishnu and I are going to just briefly talk about some of the things that stood out for us in the reading responses and then touch upon the weak slides and that's regarding needs analysis, and then we're going to talk about lesson plans really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you're looking at for
Mm-hmm.
the coming week. So that sound good?
Sound good.
Okay, all right. So we'll begin by talking about some of the reading responses, and I'll start with the grad section.
Mm-hmm.
I was so moved. The responses were so powerful, so deep, so reflective.
Okay.
And
What happened there?
a lot, and I think, and there was clearly such incredible generation of discussion within the reading responses, which was great to see. A couple of things related to this, however, before I get into what was said. You're only required to write 100 or 200 words, so I appreciate seeing a lot more, but you're not required to. I just wanted to clarify that in case you don't remember, it's just 100 to 200 words.
Yeah.
But again, if you feel like you have a lot more to say, that's perfectly
Yeah.
fine. The other thing is when you're responding to other group members, one of the things that's happening in my section is that students are responding to certain people but not others. Remember that you are responding to everyone in your group, and make sure you do that, because otherwise certain people are not getting any responses and others are getting a lot. So respond to every member of your group.
I guess for the undergrad, because we are such a small group,
Mhm.
I mean, they can actually comment to each other
Yeah.
as long as we don't left any student without comment.
Right.
So make sure that your friend's comment got commented.
Yeah.
So
So
don't
just
leave it blank, because it would be sad for the girl or the guy. Well, it's only girls anyway, to actually see that, oh, nobody actually respond to my previous
Yeah.
analysis. So yeah, make sure that you see if you found one person has not been commented, then you go on that and then you can make comments.
And that's the same principle at work here, except they have a very, very small section, but
Mhm.
our section is bigger, and we do want to make sure everyone gets heard.
Mhm.
Okay, so those two things, putting them aside, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that surfaced.
Mhm.
So really deep comments, really provocative ideas. Some of the ones I want to highlight here, just because, and there's so many, I can't highlight them all, but some kind of bring together the different threads that were present across different students' responses. So how could schools better merge the worlds of ESL and general education classrooms? And I think clearly, as the readings highlighted this, the importance of building bridges, which was again one of those things that surfaced repeatedly in the readings. How do you bring the two more in contact? How do you see ESL instructors as real resources and bridges to different students, but also different communities? How can teachers create a safe space for ESOL students as
Yeah.
well? That's something that came up. How can teachers know when teach everything in the face of so much diversity? I think we should temper our expectations of ourselves, but also, try to do our best as much as we can. It's not possible to do everything, but it is
Exactly.
possible to make small changes that make everybody feel welcomed within the classroom context, and allow students to participate as fully as possible in the instructional setting.
Yeah.
Students really appreciated the idea of accommodation without assimilation, so
Yeah.
kind of pushing against the more normativizing discourses of assimilation and
Yeah.
thinking instead about accommodating in ways that bring other people's cultures into the classroom. And again, the idea of bridges, that was super popular.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that came up is, well, what happens when you don't speak in the language. So, for example, if somebody speaks Farsi or Urdu, how would you be able to communicate with them if you don't speak one of those two languages? And I've had I've had one of those experiences myself, actually, a couple of times. I don't speak Spanish, but I had studied French, and so I had like a bit of a discount into Spanish when I was teaching young Mexican immigrant mothers, and then it was a community context in California, in Chico, California. I also there had Hmong learners, so there were all these people who are Hmong refugees in California, and they didn't speak a word of English, and I did not know any Hmong. I did not have any access to the language. There was somebody who kind of acted as that bridge in that classroom, but she didn't come all the time, so it really meant starting from scratch and using gestures, and while the kind of initial language learning process happens, dealing with that in that way, being as creative as possible, using internet resources. They didn't have that many in 2006. We didn't quite have the resources we have today, but those are the kinds of things I would encourage. Google Translate. And do you know of other services?
Well, I also experienced that thing back in Indonesia mostly, because I was also teaching Indonesian to foreigners, so most likely like I don't speak their native language, their L1. So what I did was normally using gesture, sometimes using pictures as well, or I draw. But then when you draw, and especially when you draw and then you realize that you are not a good artist, then you have to be careful with that, because sometimes our picture is also multi-interpretation.
Right.
So
it's very culturally, like, representations can be culturally coded.
But then you can always see whether your students get the meaning or not, from their facial expression. It tells a lot.
I think it's like a lot of getting back to the basics of, it's kind of like starting from scratch and being as creative and inventive as possible. And one of the things that struck me was one of the students who said that the stats that were presented in the Valdez and Callahan reading were both interesting and alarming. It's our teachers being trained for these kinds of contexts. Our hope in this course, of course, is that you feel like you're receiving the instruction you need to thrive in a context like that. But of course, there's definitely a dire need to train more teachers to serve ESOL learners. There always has been. So kind of, do you have any comments to add, or no? Well, I guess we can move on to a comment that actually offers a nice segue into the needs analysis. So a student said, I also find that often it's necessary to do an archaeology of the student's past in order to understand their educational present, right? So really, really neat conceptualization of the idea of excavating a student's past in order to kind of get a sense of who they are, what they mean today. So
archaeology, I think archaeology can mean not only the past, but also the wholeness of the students' stuff, their experience, and then their background, cultural background, and stuff like that. That thing also happened in the undergrad section, how we can actually capitalize the background of the students in the classroom. Because when we bring one culture in the classroom, everyone is actually learning. So it's us learning as a teacher, and also the students also learning, whether they're actually the culture is actually their culture or not. But then they know that, okay, this is one thing new thing that I can learn. It's also developing their sympathy.
Absolutely.
So it's always a good thing to bring and discuss the students' culture.
Absolutely, and I think the students grappled with this in such profound ways, and so it was a very rewarding week for me as an instructor. Clearly, and of course, this connects so nicely with the whole idea of needs analyses, and I've received quite a whole range of different questions about needs analyses. What happens when students don't know for example, a word of English? What do you do? So Again, this is the same kind of creativity where we talked about earlier. Think about images, emojis, graphics to convey things. And the idea is that you don't start from scratch. You end up starting to build kind of a historical sense of who this person is, a cultural sense of who this person is. The needs analysis tool is just it's a start. It's not the end of a conversation. It's just the beginning of a conversation. And it doesn't need to be all exhaustive. And it's typically a work in progress. You're doing needs analyses
every
throughout
single
your
time. Yeah,
exactly.
actually.
It's like an ongoing process. So I think you guys and I've seen a couple, and there's some that have already been already come in for me. And again, with the kinds of questions that I've faced regarding the needs analysis, there's really no set format. And it's just that, make it. You have the templates. Make it your own, and these will evolve with the feedback you'll get from me. And as we said, this is just one of those formal ways you're doing it, but you'll be doing needs analysis every single time you're in the classroom and talking to the students. So that's from this week, but we want to jump real quick to lesson planning. And so that's one of the things they're looking at for next week. They're also doing observations, but do you want to kind of do a quick summation of what they're looking at for next week?
Yeah, so you'll read a chapter by Farrell in the methodology and language teaching. You'll particularly read about what is lesson planning, and then how to design the lesson plan, and why is it important for teacher to have the lesson plan. I believe that many of the students already know what lesson plan is, but this is some nuts and bolts about the lesson plan.
And it's going to be exciting. I'm excited to see where you guys take this. I really would want to see this implemented in the classroom context. So see how this goes. This is just providing you with the foundation so you're able to implement it in the classroom. So yeah, that's just kind of a preview of what you're looking at for next week. We do want to say that it seems like as far as the placements are concerned, we should be in good shape with all of you, and you might be hearing soon if you haven't already. Actually, you probably haven't already because I'd be CC'd on those emails. But there's good news coming your way for school placements, and most of you, I think, also have your community placement squared away. If you have ongoing issues, please contact us immediately. Don't wait until it's too late. And it can get too late very quickly. So, and another great week.
Yes.
And we're excited to come back and talk again next week. Hope this format is helpful for you. Again, I do want to say that I found the reading responses so moving.
Me too, though. Like, oh my God. Like, it really... When reading all the responses, it also asked me to think. Like, to reflect as well. Because... some of them are so great, so moving. Yeah,
and I think all the questions that the students posed are, like just as you said, forced me to think about, and I teach this course, and I see this course, and I see the material, but every iteration is different because the students bring their very individual, unique lenses to bear. So
we are all learning here.
Yeah, we're all learning here. So thank you for your time, and it was great talking to you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.